It's lights out, and welcome back, everybody, to the Low Downforce podcast, the For-Friend Formula One podcast. Only got two of us, half the people, twice the fun, as they say. Just Josh and myself, Ben, here. We are the dynamic duo, and I am still catching my breath after this season opener. I mean, I know Bahrain normally gets the season opener, but with Ramadan, it got rotated around. Bring it back to Australia. We need Australia every year to start the season off.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rain played a big factor in the excitement of the race, but I mean, for real, this was a great season opener. You had obviously weather during the race. Some cars were competitive, some cars were not competitive. All five, maybe six rookies having their first races in these conditions was carnage.
Yeah, I feel bad for them. They couldn't, I think, have had a worse opportunity. I mean, it even caught some of the veterans out, and we will obviously get into it. But the two best words in Formula One are variable conditions. That is what we got right off the bat. And if this is just a microcosm of the season we're about to have, then I'm going to have to get two seatbelts because it's about to be electric all season long.
Unfortunately, I don't think all the races in the desert are going to have variable conditions.
No, that is true. But before we look at the other races, looking back, right off the bat, race rating. What do you give it? Out of 10, how do you feel? We're going to, at the end of the season, we will give our favorite races, what we voted the best race of the year. So starting off strong.
I think in terms of excitement, it was probably up there. It was probably a 7 or 8. It was probably an 8 or 9. But I think I'm going to go 7 just because I'm a Ferrari fan and it was disappointing from that perspective. But as a neutral, there was everything in this race.
It is true. We are missing, of course, J9 and Matt tonight. J9 went with a 6, Matt with a 7, and both of their reasoning was exciting. It was interesting. There was strategy at play, but too many of the laps were under caution because of all the crashes. Maybe I'm just happy that Formula One is back. I went with a 9 out of 10. Because I really think this race had everything except for overtakes, like strong overtakes. You just couldn't get that because you couldn't risk it in the rain. But in terms of, there was chaos before we even finished the formation lap. There was a race ultimately decided by less than a second, which there are years where we would have begged for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all you're missing is overtakes. Fun fact, every single race in the history of the Australian Grand Prix at Melbourne has had at least 3 DNFs. And if you count Isaac Hadjar's did not start because he crashed on the formation lap, that is 6 DNFs this year.
Yeah.
So double the fun, as I already said.
Yeah. We opened the show saying it was just carnage. And that it absolutely was. But before all the carnage of the race, I feel like we have to talk about qualifying. Sets up the race, sets the grid for Sunday. So
we'll get into it quickly. I think one of the things that also made this weekend crazy is because, we're American, we don't speak Celsius over here, is we literally went on qualifying from near 100-degree weather to 25 degrees cooler during the race. It was very difficult for teams to get their car set up for both qualifying and the race. It forecasts rain, but you never know for certain. But starting off with the biggest bummer in qualifying, it's got to be Haas for me. So first off, Ollie Behrman, he had a terrible weekend, at least to start. He's one of the few rookies to finish the race, so maybe he saved it a little bit. But with little running, they didn't even get his car fully fixed. He had a gearbox issue leaving the pit lane to start qualifying, so he never actually got to record a lap. So going into the race, he literally had only 15 laps the whole weekend.
And that's what happens when you crash in practice.
It's true, but I think it's also a little bit of Haas's fault because they did no quali running, no performance running and testing. So Ollie found out the hard way. But I think it's clear why they didn't do performance running because they look terrible this year. Ocon, a veteran driver on a new team, to be fair, learning a new system. But, 19th, 20th, and the 20th because you didn't even set a quali time, horrendous. This is how we felt about Kick Sauber last year at the back half, how we felt about Alpine at the beginning of the year when they were just absolutely dead last. On the flip side, though, some of the standouts, I'm torn. I mean, on paper, it's Yuki Tsunoda because he goes P5, but
Yeah.
you also have to throw Alex Albon P6 in there as well. I think people were a little more optimistic about Williams, like after testing, but
Yeah.
those are two teams that I think people thought were going to struggle to make it ahead of the big four teams. Both of them outqualified both Ferraris. You've got Liam Lawson and Kimi Antonelli all the way down there. They were both out in Q1, and it's like those are rookies. Maybe you give them a little bit of a leash, but I mean, they capitalized on a strong start to the year.
Yeah, absolutely. With Ferrari, I had hoped that they were just putting in a rain setup, and it wasn't going to work in quality, but it would come during the race.
Spoiler alert, rain setup wasn't that great either.
That did not happen. Terrible weekend for Ferrari. We can get into that.
We will get into
later.
it. There were no penalties for impeding or anything like that. So otherwise, a relatively clean quality. Of course, we get Lando takes pole and his teammate right next to him, and they gap the field by almost 4/10. So we see McLaren in front, but as we've mentioned, crazy, chaotic, rainy race. Anything can happen.
Yeah, and one last thing on Yuki Tsunoda. I think to some extent he's lucky he didn't get picked for that second Red Bull seat because it is cursed. I think he's probably going to have more success leading the RB team than he would being in Liam Lawson's
I don't know
right
if it's even cursed as much as Red Bull just has such an undrivable car for anyone but Max it's just it's a death seat. Like it will ruin your career trajectory. Yeah, but that brings us to race day. There's so much to talk about. We got to jump right into it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we start with the start of the race, obviously. But even before that, we have the first bit of carnage where we have Isaac Hadjar on the formation lap, sends it into a wall because of the rain, the difficult conditions. So then we get a delayed start. And after the delayed start, went pretty well for Lando Norris at the front, which he's had some issues starting in the past, but he did great with multiple starts this race. But it did not go so well for Jack Doohan and Carlos Sainz, both also out on lap one because of the rain. Just impossible conditions to drive.
I feel like Carlos crashing early. I know he's new to Williams, but I think that collectively, gave a little slack to all the rookies of proving how difficult it was to drive in those conditions.
It does sound like his Williams had a mechanical error rather than just struggling to drive in the conditions. But yeah, I mean, the conditions were.
Hey, I know you're about to get
everyone.
into, but we get Fernando Alonso later in the race as well.
Yeah, he DNF'd lap 34. Gabriel Bortoleto, another rookie, lap 45, runs into a wall. Liam Lawson spins into the barrier lap 48. So all in all, with 6 drivers having to DNF because of the conditions, it was absolutely crazy. Only one penalty. Gabriel Bortoleto had an unsafe release. Not a huge deal. Kimi Antonelli had a 5-second penalty, but then after the race, it got he got unpenalized.
Yeah, they appealed it successfully, which is the first time since 2023 that we've had a successful appeal. It was Aston Martin back then.
So, yeah, I mean, the whole story about this race was just fighting the conditions and strategizing when to switch tires to optimize your position within the race. And there were some teams that capitalized and some teams that did not. Obviously, Lando Norris did great, won the race. Max Verstappen, known for being great in the rain, finished second. George Russell and Kimi Antonelli finished right behind. Great result for Kimi. And he was promoted back to P4 after that penalty was reversed. Alex Albon 5th, great result for him. Lance Stroll 6th, Hülkenberg 7th, Charles Leclerc 8th. Bad that the top Ferrari is an 8th right there. Oscar Piastri 9th, not great for him, but we'll get into why. And then Lewis Hamilton, a horrible start to his Ferrari career,
I feel like immediately apologize. He doesn't know I exist, but I feel like I got to apologize to Lance Stroll because I've been ragging on him like crazy, and
he was good.
I mean, he drove well, which to be fair, half the battle was just keeping it out of the wall, but I thought he was going to get squashed wholeheartedly all year by Fernando Alonso, one of the most veterans of the game ever. And Lance Stroll is the one carrying Aston right now. I know it's been one race.
One race. Yeah, one race. But, yeah, I mean, in the constructors' standings, or the driver's standings, at any point during the season, would you have expected Lance Stroll to be 6th? Nico Hulkenberg to be 7th
I wouldn't have expected
above the Ferraris.
I wouldn't have expected Aston, Williams, and Sauber even to have
Both
be higher in the
Ferraris.
constructors than Ferrari. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I think the biggest moment of the race, I thought, was you had the two McLarens out in front. They have a rocket ship, and they were leading the majority of the race. And Oscar Piastri is closing in on Lando Norris, and then both of them go off the track into the gravel. Lando saves it, gets back on the track, continues along, stays in first, and Oscar goes across the track into the grass, and I thought his car was going to get entirely stuck. And credit to him for like slowly reversing out of the grass.
The crowd went nuts.
And
I mean,
re-entering all the way at the back of the pack.
Speaking of Lance Stroll, the good with the bad, last year he unnecessarily beaches his car in gravel on a formation lap, I think that even was.
Hey, this was grass. This was grass.
But that was back in Brazil last year. But usually you see the tires start spinning in the grass and it's done. And already devastating for Oscar because it's his home race. He has at that point a legitimate chance to win the race still. And you talked about curses earlier. Australians are cursed at the Australian Grand Prix. It's crazy.
I do think you have to give him a little bit of credit, though, because if he gets stuck and they have to bring out a safety car, I don't know if Lando Norris wins his race.
It's actually interesting. I was about to bring up that because I'm glad you brought that up because that is where all of the strategy came into play because drivers are putting on slick tires. A couple are going on the mediums, most on the hards, but very intense rain starts to fall on only part of the track. So you've got half dry, half wet track. I think you hear some of the radios are calling it like class 3 rain. So pretty intense out of nowhere. Yeah. And all of a sudden everybody has to make the decision of how long do you stay on the slicks? How long is the rain going to last? Do I switch back to the inters or do I kind of hang it out there? And I'm not sure if both McLarens don't go wide there. I don't know if Lando pits that lap. So ignoring Oscar running wide, because that's on like the penultimate, right before the penultimate turn and we see that Lando and McLaren winds up getting the strategy call correct.
Yeah.
Max stays out, and obviously you're at more risk as the leader because everyone can react to you.
Yep.
But Max stays out, doesn't quite build the pit window gap. And by the time he stays out another lap, he's already absolutely lost the pit window because McLaren does make the right choice, and the inters
because you
are
gain
way
so much
quicker
more
than the
speed
slicks.
when you're on those inter tires versus staying out on the slicks. Because at one point, both Ferraris were leading the race, and they were on the slicks, and they just can't go quick enough, and they had to pit because they were the last ones to pit, basically.
The other thing we won't know that I'm really curious about is right in that time, you also get Bortoletto and you get Lawson spinning out, hitting the wall. You get that last safety car, but it made me wonder, watching how much faster Lando was than the drivers who stayed out on the dry tire. It made me wonder if the yellow flags and safety car didn't go out there, like you might have had an Alex Albon podium. Like I think if there's not the benefit for Max to pit under safety car at that point, because I think it was either right before or right during, is especially the Ferraris. I mean, they already got caught out, but there was probably about half a lap. I'd have to watch it back to be certain that the people who had already switched inters, if it stayed clean racing conditions, they would have made up even more ground and it would have gotten really, really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, part of the variable conditions is obviously the right strategy calls, taking in the weather radar and just making it work. And part of it is just entirely luck because you can't predict exactly when a safety car is going to happen. You don't know when somebody's going to crash into the wall.
That's why people like to go long on tires is in the especially in the back of the pack to see if there will be a safety car that brings them back into the race.
Yeah.
I think the other crazy thing is, in a very weird way, Isaac Hadjar might be the MVP of this race because if he doesn't crash on formation lap and have a 15-minute delay to that race might be over before that rain falls. Like we might have missed out on all of the impressive strategy at the end of that race if it doesn't get delayed 15 minutes or it comes, 1 to 2 laps from the end and it's not enough, not enough for people to risk pitting.
Yeah.
So thank you, Isaac. I know you had a horrible day and there were some unfortunate TV shots following you around as you were kind of going through it. But, hey, maybe you saved the race because honestly, up until that point, it's about staying on the road. But like I said, there weren't really overtakes. We really hadn't.
Piastri had one good one on the Ferraris when the Ferraris were on bad tires.
But I'm saying that was like way after the fact. So it's interesting to see. But I mean, what a race. I'm curious to see how it tops it. And I know you and I were going to Montreal for our first F1 race later this year. And that I was immediately thinking that's probably the place that's known for variable conditions as much as Melbourne. So we might be in for a doozy.
Bring some ponchos and umbrellas.
Certainly. Certainly. But I mean, it's exactly how you want a season to start. There's so many talking points. I mean, we could keep going down it. I mean, I'm glad there's safety cars, glad there's strategy at the end because you see Max's tires started to go earlier in the race on that first stint. And all of a sudden, McLaren's were running over a second faster than everyone else on the track. They built up a 16 or 18 second gap in a matter of laps once Max started to really destroy and degrade his tires.
Yeah, that being said, I don't think I'd want every race to be like this.
No.
I think some races are great with wheel-to-wheel action, and other races are good with variable conditions.
It makes the next race, which is in China this coming weekend, it's a doubleheader to start the year. I think it makes it more exciting because I think we all agree that McLaren is on top, but we don't really know for certain the dry, normal pecking order behind them. I mean, Mercedes did really well in the rain. Max obviously always overperforms in the Red Bull, but it's in normal qualifying, in normal dry conditions. Maybe Ferrari
cannot be that bad.
Hey, maybe Ferrari is all right. Maybe Williams is actually really consistent this year, but it's also, maybe Haas finds a little bit of a groove. We really don't know. So there's still a lot of questions to be answered, a lot to pay attention to.
You want to go straight into top or flop?
Yeah, I feel like we've hinted at a bunch of them already. There's still a couple names we haven't talked about. So starting with the top, I'm going Kimi Antonelli. We talked about how rough of a race it was for the rookies. If you count Liam Lawson, you have 6 rookies and only 2 of them make it to the end of this race. Ollie Behrman stuck in a Haas.
He finished dead last of the finishers.
Of the finishers. Hey, still top 15, baby.
Yeah.
But, I mean, nothing really impressive. And again, you could say, he didn't get a lot of practice time. He might have been great in practice, and the Haas is never going to let us figure that out this weekend because it's not like Ocon did much better at all. But Kimi Antonelli, he has the issue, which I think was very unfortunate in qualifying. He goes into the gravel pretty much like every other single driver, and he happens to pick up damage during qualifying. And again, nothing like more egregious than the other drivers. He just gets unlucky. So he just misses out. Gabriel Bortoleto actually knocks him out in Q1. So he starts 16th. And hey, the message of the day sometimes is just staying on the road. He had a couple spins, a couple snaps, but he hung in there. He drove well. He goes from 16th to 4th, which even if you're not a rookie, you should be hailed as one of the drivers of the day with that performance. And the fact that, again, in abysmal conditions for the first, your first F1 race, and he handled it like a pro. It was a phenomenal drive.
Yeah, I think before this race, I was kind of thinking I was going to be a Kimi Antonelli hater this year. I didn't think he was going to, obviously you can't fill the shoes of Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, but I just didn't know how well he would perform in that car. Mercedes car, probably not the best of the top teams, and I wasn't sure, but going from 16th to 4th in your first race in these conditions, and you mentioned he had the spin. He had another snap where he saved the car from spinning. And after seeing how all the other drivers were fighting the conditions, for him to be able to keep it on the road despite doing those two things was insane. I
mean, I know everybody's quick to overreact online, and it's this kid's hyped up so much, and then he goes P16 in qualifying. And if you don't know the context, but even with the context, you're like, oh, another person, doomed from the hype. But I mean, Lewis gets talked about as nearly winning. I think he was P2 in his debut. Max Verstappen, who people are saying Kimi's, the greatest prospect since Max. Max DNF'd in Australia on his debut.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that, I hope Kimi has those trajectories. I'm very quickly becoming a Kimi Antonelli fan. I think partly because, like I was just mentioning, when there's that much hype like you want people to live up to it. Like I know like Josh and I are big soccer fans. And so everybody gets compared to Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo. And of course they don't pan out because those are the two greatest of all times. They clear even the best player, the best players in the world. And so there's always this, oh, it's the next wonder kid. It's the next wonder kid. And then of course they don't meet the expectations. I know it's only one race, but Kimmy did a really good job of putting his stamp on like, nah, I'm legit. Like I'm here for it. And it makes me happy to see. Honestly, the whole rookie class, I know they had bad races, but I think all of them, for the most part, had a highlight of the weekend.
Yeah, I think it's definitely promising for the rest of the season, and even Nico Hulkenberg in his post race interview, he was saying like Gabriel Bortoleto is going to catch him by the end of the season. He's going to have to keep his pace, so it'll be really interesting to see. My top is the midfield battle. With the new regulations coming in 2026. I think a lot of these teams feel pressure to get points early on in the season because if their car's not good enough early enough, they're never going to score points all season. And then now you have Williams is 4th in the Constructors' Championship, Aston Martin is 5th, and Kick Sauber is 6th. All three of them got great points, and Ferrari's in 7th. They're a midfield team now. And yeah, and obviously a struggle for Alpine and Haas, and RB struggled after qualifying, but it seems like we have a midfield battle, and obviously Williams has two great drivers. Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso seem like they could be good again. Like they've been okay, but they've been solidly the 5th best team the past few years. And Kick Sauber was terrible last year, and they come in and score 6 points immediately.
And like you said, like it's super critical. Some teams might start looking towards 2026. And, if they stop developing, then they need to bag points early in the season. So getting out to a hot start is huge. I am skeptical. Like I'm sure people will start developing their cars throughout the season. But I mean, it's really when we talk about the big four, part of the reason McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari, the reason they're the ones at the top on a different level from everybody else is because they have infinite dollars. Like they're massive.
There's cost cap.
No, but I mean, there's cost cap, but they just on their brands, they're able to hire the best talent. They're the most desirable teams. I still think these midfield teams really benefit from an extra $10-20 million. Not all of them are as kind of financially confident as the big teams, but you talked about it. Sauber, Nico bags, I think it was 8 points. 6 points, excuse me. Sauber only had 4 points all of last year.
Yeah.
Williams had 17 points last year, and they're already at 10.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely.
And all three of those teams also only had one driver finish. So if they put together races where both drivers in the car can finish with the points, there's going to be a midfield battle.
It makes me excited because even if McLaren does run away with it, which as a McLaren fan, I'm all for it, but it gives me confidence that even if they're the ones kind of storming away, there are going to be a lot of storylines and a lot of competition to pay attention to all year.
Hey, McLaren and Mercedes are tied on points right now.
That is true.
So don't get too cocky.
That is true. I'm feeling good though. I can't lie.
Yeah, you should. You have the best car, and I don't even think it's close.
We will see, of course. Again, we haven't seen full dry condition running, so we'll hopefully get to see that this coming weekend in Shanghai. But going from tops, obviously we mentioned a lot of DNFs. We mentioned a lot of chaos, so there are definitely some flops out there.
Yeah, my flop is going to be a team that had 0 DNFs, and it's Ferrari. And
might as well have DNF'd.
Yeah, honestly. Like, what a terrible race. The strategy was just not there all weekend. The pace was not there all weekend. We're getting clowned on the internet because of our team radio messages.
Oh, the radio was so funny. Words of wisdom, baby. Words of wisdom.
Yeah, Charles Leclerc, if you have to go look up the clip online, but if you don't, Charles Leclerc had radioed in that there was water in his seat, and so he's like, "Why is there water in my seat?" And the engineer was basically like, "Oh, it's the water." And it's like, what kind of answer is that?
Ferrari's in mid-season form. I think their points return will improve, but their strategy and radio is legendary. And on the other side, Lewis, I know he's got a new engineer, but there were some pretty awkward, pretty annoyed moments on the radio.
The engineer
for
is
all
trying to
hear.
teach him how to drive the car, and he's like, and Lewis is like, I know how to do this. Leave me alone.
And Lewis should get the tiniest bit of slack because it's new team, new engine, especially after being in one team for so long. But you say that, and then, Ferrari's stud, prodigal son is barely ahead of him, neither looking great. It just not
I mean,
the greatest.
And 5 points is just not good enough for a race weekend, especially when you have both drivers finishing the race. So I think Ferrari is the easy flop of the week.
I'm also flopping a team. I went V-Carb, though, and it actually doesn't have so much to do with Isaac Hadjar crashing in the formation lap. Like, I think the one disappointing thing from that is he wasted a P11 qualifying performance, which was a phenomenal performance. It was the top rookie qualifying, nearly made it into Q3, which would have been incredible on debut. And so it's just generally unfortunate that you just don't convert what could have potentially been, a better than normal qualifying position. But it's the fact that they walk out of there with 0 points, because we talked about how great Yuki was in qualifying. Right when we're talking about all of the, McLaren running off, all of the strategy to switch tires at the end of the race, V-Carb totally botched it, left Yuki out there, and he goes from fourth all the way out of the points. Doesn't have the chance, even with the safety car, to get back into the points. And so, I mean, who knows? V-Carb might be really good, but I doubt, especially this first part of the season when Isaac Hadjar is still really a rookie, I'd be hard-pressed to find a lot of weekends where V-Carb is qualifying P5 and P11. You would think that there's points somewhere in there. And then, especially to spoil what could have been the race of the year for Yuki, I mean, he really did no wrong. His strategist just kind of screwed him over.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big waste of the weekend, you'd say, for V-Carb and Ferrari. And I think both you would expect to fight in their tier of championship throughout the season, because I don't think V-Carb is going to go pointsless throughout most of the year. Ferrari is not going to be in the midfield battle. So
you hope.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll stay there. I think
that'd
they'll
be good
improve,
for the
but
podcast of just listening to me in shambles.
It is interesting to see, though, because Mercedes did look really good, albeit unusual conditions, unusual track, but
they're always good in unusual conditions.
Exactly. So we'll have to see where Ferrari actually stacks up. But you're talking about championship battles. We've got a championship battle of our own already starting out with our very own Predictors Championship. Of course, we made a bunch of predictions before this race, as we will every race. And some of us panned out better than others.
Yeah. So unfortunately, you, the defending champ, you're in last place after one race. So you only got 2 points predicting Norris P1 and Norris on pole. Everybody got those points except for J9, who had predicted Leclerc on pole. We all predicted Norris to win the race. Matt was the only one that had Max Verstappen in P2, so that was good.
Shout out, Matt. Already improving off of last year.
Yeah.
Looking like Sauber.
Nobody got Lewis Hamilton in P10, of course, and nobody got George Russell in P3. And you were the only one to get your hot take right, because a rookie did
I got my hot take wrong.
That's what I meant. You were the only one to get it wrong. You said a rookie would outperform their teammate. Did not happen.
Which is crazy. Kimi Antonelli finishes P4.
Yeah.
And really, I was kind of screwed because everybody else pretty much crashed out. So.
Yeah, and that was mine. Rookie crashed DNF. That happened many times. Lawson, 15th or worse. He crashed out. Didn't happen. And a rookie top 5 for Matt. So Matt's leading the way. I'm following right behind. Matt has 6. I have 5. J9 has 4. And you're in the back with 2. So you'll have to tune into our China predictions, and you'll have to see if you can make a comeback.
There's plenty of time for me to step it back up. It's fun seeing Matt 0 to hero right off the bat. We love to see it. It was an incredible first weekend in Formula One. As I mentioned, it's a doubleheader. So we've got another race, and it's a sprint race in China coming up this weekend. So be on the lookout this week for an F101 episode on what sprint races are and how the weekend looks a little different. And of course, our predictions for the next race. As we are all year, we are on YouTube. We are on socials. Be sure to engage with us. Check us out. Let us know what you thought of the Australian Grand Prix. And we will talk to you very, very soon. Until then, stay speedy, everyone. Goodbye.